My name is James Yonker. I'm the Director of the Office of Strategic Diversity Planning and Research in DDEEA and the Principal Investigator for the 2021 Student Campus Climate Survey. In this presentation, I will share with you a brief history of student campus climate surveys at UW-Madison and highlight some key findings and themes from the 2021 survey. For those interested in the full results from the survey, including the technical report and disaggregations of questions by student characteristics, please visit our website for additional information. For a little bit of background, conducting regular campus climate surveys is part of our diversity framework and real change plan. The goal is to understand how students experience the campus climate at UW-Madison, including how students of different backgrounds and identities experience life here. At the core of this endeavor is understanding and measuring the extent to which students personally feel welcome, included, like they belong, safe, listened to, valued, and treated fairly and with respect. As many of you know, DDEEA fielded the first student-wide campus climate survey at UW-Madison in fall 2016. All students were invited to participate, and over 8,600 completed the survey for a 20.6% response rate. We fielded the second student-wide campus climate survey in fall 2021. Again, all enrolled students were invited to participate, but this time over 13,400 students completed the survey for a 28.2% response rate, a 37% participation increase over the last survey. Importantly, in both 2016 and 2021, the students that completed the survey were generally representative of the student body overall. So what did we see in the previous survey? Results from the 2016 survey were generally positive, with large majorities of students feeling welcome, respected, safe, and like they belong on campus. Students said that they often felt respected in group work and in class, and that they were often able to find others to study or socialize with. However, the survey also showed that that wasn't true for everyone. Students from historically underrepresented and marginalized groups responded less positively than their counterparts to many questions. For example, students with a disability, non-binary or transgender students, LGBTQ+ students, and students of color consistently reported a less positive experience of campus climate than their peers. 5 years later in 2021, we see mostly the same thing. Broadly speaking, the results of the 2021 survey were comparable to the results from the previous survey. While there were some differences, which I will mention later, there were relatively few overall changes in student responses between the survey waves. What this means is that while most students reported a positive campus climate experience, we continue to see a pattern where some groups of students consistently report a less positive experience. Students with a disability, non-binary, transgender, Buddhist, older undergraduates, LGBTQ+, students of color, and Pell Grant eligible undergraduate students responded less positively than their peers on many questions. Note that we added more student characteristics to our set of comparisons, so those listed in red were new to the 2021 survey. In the next few slides, I will give some examples of patterns we saw in the 2021 survey that mirrored those from 2016. So here is an example from one of the first sets of questions about general feelings on campus. We asked students, this semester on campus, overall, how often do you feel welcome, respected, safe, and like you belong? The response choices ranged from 1, never, to 5, extremely often. Here are the overall averages for 2016 and 2021. The error bars that you see indicate statistical significance and meaningful sizes. That is, when the bars overlap, there was not a meaningful change between survey waves, which is what we see for every item here. To help with interpretation, we also show to the right the percentage of students that respond very or extremely often, the two highest categories. As I mentioned, overall, Most students continue to report a generally positive campus climate. 3 out of 4 students reported very or extremely often feeling welcome, respected, and safe, and about 60% of students reported very or extremely often feeling like they belong. However, the second half of the main finding concerns pervasive differences in how some groups of students respond to the survey. Across the top, you can see the overall percent of students that responded very or extremely often to these items in 2021. Below that, you can see the corresponding percentages for the groups that I mentioned earlier. Dashes indicate the difference wasn't statistically significant from the overall. 2 things to note here. First, these 8 groups of students regularly reported a less positive experience of campus climate. Second, it's important to note that for feeling welcome, respected, and safe, half or more of the students in these groups responded very or extremely often. You may be wondering why we specifically highlight the experiences of these 8 student groups. The survey included 22 core items across 9 domains that measure students' personal experiences of campus climate. Across these core items, the following groups most frequently expressed a significantly less positive experience. Students with a disability and non-binary students responded less positively on 20 of the 20 core items, almost all of them. Transgender, Buddhist, older undergraduates, LGBTQ+, students of color, and Pell Grant eligible undergraduates responded less positively on half or more of the 22 core items. In no case did students from any of these 8 groups respond more positively than their counterparts. Differences for student groups not shown here were less frequent or insistent. In this section, I will give 2 examples of areas where we lost ground. We asked students how comfortable they would feel contacting UWPD if they had a problem. In 2016, over half of students, 53%, said they would feel very or extremely comfortable contacting UWPD. By 2021, that percentage shrank to 40%. On the other side of the spectrum, the percentage of students that reported feeling not at all or slightly comfortable increased from 19% in 2016 to 27% in 2021. Notably, there was not a significant change on this question for international students or students of color. What accounts for the overall change is a substantial shift downward among domestic white students. We included a follow-up question for students that said not at all or slightly comfortable, asking them why. In many cases, the comments were not specific to UWPD, but skepticism and apprehension about police and law enforcement generally. Some students said they weren't sure how to contact UWPD or when would be appropriate to do so, and others said they would exhaust all other possibilities, leaving contacting UWPD as a last resort. Finally, a small percentage of students mentioned specific issues with the UWPD, and others said they wanted to avoid perceived hassles contacting the police. We also asked students how often they spent time with people different from themselves outside of class. While students continued to often spend time with others different from themselves in terms of race or ethnicity, sexual orientation, religious or spiritual beliefs, nationality, and social class or socioeconomic status, we see that students spent significantly less time with others of different political views. Finally, I'll wrap up with a few areas that improved since 2016. Undergraduate students reported feeling their comments and questions were more respected by their teaching assistants in 2021. The percentage of students who reported feeling their comments or questions were extremely respected by their teaching assistants in class, the very highest category, increased from 24% in 2016 to 39% in 2021. This is an example of an area that was already high but nonetheless improved between survey waves. While more students said they felt expected to represent the point of view of their identity in class, how they felt about that expectation shifted. In 2016, 41% of students reported feeling negatively about being expected to represent the point of view of their identity in class, while 27% reported feeling positively. In 2021, those percentages flipped. 21% reported feeling negatively, and 45% reported feeling positively, causing the overall average to lean positive. For undergraduate students that had completed an ethnic studies course, we asked them how much that course encouraged them to value diversity, notice and manage bias, and be sensitive to others' perspectives. All three measures improved significantly. The percent of students saying very or extremely increased from 48 to 62% for valuing diversity, 45 to 61% for noticing and managing biases, and 50 to 66% for being sensitive to others' perspectives. So to recap, results were mostly stable between survey waves. While there were some changes, most students continued to report a generally positive campus climate experience. That said, we continue to see that some historically underrepresented and marginalized respond less positively. Again, for those of you interested in learning about the survey, please visit our website. Thank you.
Thank you very much and good afternoon. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for the session on using data to inform our decisions, the 2021 Campus Climate Survey. My name is Gabe Javier. I use he, him pronouns, and I serve as the Associate Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs and Identity and Inclusion. I also served as the co-chair of the Campus Climate Survey Task Force, along with former Assistant Vice Provost Andrew Rishinghani. And I'm delighted to be joined on stage by members of the Campus Climate Survey Task Force, whom I will introduce shortly. First, I'd like to recognize the incredible work of Dr. James Yonker and Dr. Rosie Bay from the Office of Strategic Diversity Planning and Research. Dr. Yonker and Dr. Bay served as the principal investigators for the Campus Climate Survey, and their efforts are at the center of our presentation today, so thank you. And though we only have a short time together today, our session, like many others during the Diversity Forum, should serve as a starting point. Earlier today, you would have received the Campus Climate Survey Task Force for the 2021 Campus Climate Survey, and this report represents the focused efforts of a cross-campus collaborative of faculty, students, and staff aimed at recommending data-informed interventions. And I always like to remember and reflect on the fact that the data that we see are truly the voices of our students and their experiences. So I'd like to now introduce the panel and introduce a little bit of what we've asked them to talk about. Dr. Markus Brauer is professor in the Department of Psychology, Wisconsin School of Business and School of Medicine and Public Health. We've been asked to talk about and give commentary on the process between the results between 2016 and 2021. Omar Dumdum, a PhD candidate in mass communication, who will offer a perspective on results as a graduate student and as an international student. Dr. Tawandra Rowell-Cunsolo, assistant professor in the Standard Rosenbaum School of Social Work, will offer perspective on results as a faculty member. Warren Scherer, the director of the Gender and Sexuality Campus Center, will offer a reflection on what the Campus Climate Survey indicates about LGBTQ+ populations. And Nola Walker, who's the coordinator for assessment and evaluation services for the UW Libraries, will offer a reflection on the results and implications that exist for third spaces at the university. And last but not least, Dr. James Yonker, who we can direct any super hard questions to. We'll start with Dr. Brauer.
Thank you. My name is Markus Brauer. I was part of the task force that looked at the data and tried to make sense of them together with several other members here on this panel. It was a task force that consisted of faculty, staff, undergraduate students, and students, also representatives of the Office of the Chief Diversity Officer. and the data analysis group led by Jay Yonker. A good climate survey makes concrete suggestions for next action steps. And actually, I do think we have a very good climate survey compared to climate surveys that are conducted elsewhere. I study climate surveys, so I think that we have one of the better ones, I want to say. And the concrete action steps that have come out of this survey is what I'm going to talk about next. So first of all, despite you have just seen the data, we have made improvements with the teaching assistants. Despite that, I think what students, especially students from marginalized groups, tell us is that they do want inclusive learning environments. And I think there is room for improvement. We can make progress there. We now know what kind of teaching practices and what kind of instructor behaviors lead to the reduction of the achievement gap, or if you don't like that term, the reduction of the opportunity gap. And I think we have to get the word out, and we have to make sure that a larger number of instructors knows how to create inclusive classroom climates, how to use these inclusive teaching practices. With regard to the second recommendation that we sort of came up with is we need to increase campus members' capacity to respond to hostile, harassing, and intimidating behavior. Little test question, what do you think among the students that were surveyed, what is the percentage of students who have ever experienced hostile, harassing or intimidating experience? And think about that is on campus or off campus, and also behavior by other students. Do you have a number in your head? Well, it turned out the number was 14%, which maybe that shows how naive I am. I expected that to be slightly higher. Yet, 14%, that's 14% too many, and we have to work on that. And I think, again, there are people who have done research on this question, and there are ways to react effectively to hostile, harassing, and intimidating behavior. And actually, that is surprising. One of the most effective ways very often is not to immediately respond, both as a bystander and as a target, but to actually first look left and right, find allies in the situation, and then stand up as a group and communicate to that person, to the perpetrator, as a group, that kind of behavior is unacceptable. So again, we have to increase people's ability to respond to that hostile, harassing, and intimidating behavior. Finally, what the students told us in their open-ended responses is they wanted to have more opportunities to interact with other students that are not like them. And I think that could be an important opportunity for us, and where we can think about creatively how we can do that. Of course, these types of interactions can be structured around discussion about race, ethnicity, intergroup relations, but I think what the students also told us, that they have sometimes a hard time getting to know people who are different from them, and whether we can propose social activities, either in the classroom with, I don't know, project groups that are randomly created, or outside the classroom, academic activities around the humanities, the arts, etc., where people get to know other people who are not like them. I'm going to stop here because the time's short, but these are sort of three of the highlights, the key recommendations that came from the data of the Campus Climate Survey. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you, everyone, for inviting me here. Thank you also, Jay, for the presentation. So my task today is to provide some perspectives on the results of the survey from the points of view of international students and graduate students. So I have 4 points. First, international students' understanding and experience of their social realities in the US are very different, given their distinct socio-cultural backgrounds and upbringing. So this explains why their responses are more positive compared to the overall average. For example, international students feel they are more connected to UW-Madison. They feel more positively that UW-Madison is committed to diversity. They're more likely to see UW-Madison as inclusive in almost all dimensions. They were less likely to report campus climate as their reason for considering leaving the campus, and they feel more comfortable contacting the UW-Madison police. These are all valid feelings, but we need to critically analyze why they feel as such. For many international students, this campus here is already more diverse than where they came from. Culture also plays a part in terms of how international students may be more trusting than its American counterparts, which might contribute to more positive and optimistic responses. Further, as we international students are socialized into respecting and legally conforming with institutions, we often become more comfortable with hierarchies and organizations that enforce laws, such as the police. There is indeed a disconnect with how international students view DEI and campus climate compared with domestic students. This was validated in one question in the survey. How respectfully are international students treated in UW-Madison? While international students themselves rated a high 4.1, non-international students rated a lower 3.8, meaning domestic students were more critical about how the campus treats international students. There is particularly one set of questions, however, where international students were very highly critical of. This is in terms of how their religious, disability, or other instructional accommodations were not met. I would argue that this set of questions are not merely perception-based, but rather rooted in their actual experience. For me, this is a very meaningful snapshot of how the campus treats international students. Second point, the survey reveals that graduate students and international students assume the heavy responsibility of maintaining a more positive, more diverse, and more inclusive climate. As Jay mentioned earlier, undergrads are more comfortable approaching their TAs than their faculty or instructors. Further, graduate students and international students reveal that they feel more positively about being expected to represent their identity's point of view compared to the overall average or compared to domestic students. UW-Madison administration needs to rethink about how to reward international and graduate students' contribution to campus climate, and DEI more systemically. Actionable ways to do this is for the university to fully cover the cost of mandatory fees that graduate students still pay for essential programs and services. Also, international students pay an international students fee every semester to cover the operational cost of ISS. Absolving these fees would go a long way, not just in unburdening the financial precarities of graduate and international students. This is a bold sign of the university's commitment of taking care of certain student populations that make the campus more diverse and more welcoming. Point number 3, international students are not a monolith. Future campus climate surveys should further disaggregate this group to find out differences between certain clusters that have higher representation than others. Currently, Chinese students comprise almost half of the 7,000 international student population. And when combined with Indians and South Koreans, they already make up almost 75%. This means that students from the other 112 countries merely make up only 25% of the international student population. Unpacking this would reveal significant nuances as to the international students' perceptions of campus climate and DEI. My final point is that UW-Madison needs to rethink its conceptualization of DEI, as current initiatives and metrics focus too much on domestic student population. We need to have this conversation. The official definition of being a minority in this university only includes domestic students. It excludes international students. And given this root definition, all other DEI initiatives cater to this conceptualization of a minority. International students are literally second-class citizens when it comes to DEI initiatives. And the administrators and faculty's responses on international students' issues are always refer them to ISS. There needs to be more concerted, strategic, and holistic effort to include international students in conversations about DEI, because right now, international students don't belong. Thank you.
Okay, I can add a few things based on my experience and my assessment on the value of being a faculty member who's relatively new here. I've only been at UW for about 2 years. And so this was my first time serving on a task force here. I'm a researcher at heart, so I can always find value in most forms of data collection. And for me, campus climate surveys are important because it gives you a better sense of the pulse of the place. And since I'm a newcomer, I wanted to see what was happening here. And as a faculty member, I know that whatever is happening around campus and on campus, outside of the classroom, inevitably makes its way inside, right? So for instance, it may be that the isolation that BIPOC students are experiencing across campus also affects their in-class experiences and their performance in the course, which you don't want to see happen. And that's largely because they are feeling, as we saw, that they're not necessarily in the most inclusive environment, is what I'll say. And there's plenty of evidence. It's not just UW. There's plenty of evidence that BIPOC students tend to feel more isolated, have a lower sense of belonging in predominantly white environments. And some of these findings were validated here. I will give UW credit for even doing this survey at all. A lot of institutions don't want to do this because they know that after this, there'll be pressure to actually do something about it. And I think that that's the worst thing that we can do, is have something like that, do these surveys and then not do anything about it, because the students were gracious enough to share their experiences with us. And I will say one of the most valuable things about serving on this task force, in addition to meeting new people, was reading some of the survey responses. One of the exercises, we were given our own set of qualitative responses, and we were asked to read them and to kind of categorize them. And for me, that was really useful because we all interpret data differently, right? And so for me, I wanted to get my own eyes on it. And there was some overlap. Just like Professor Brauer, I saw that students seemed genuinely interested in having more opportunities to interact with people who were different from them. They just didn't know how to do it. And so that's an easy thing that we can reach for, and we can raise awareness about opportunities to do just that. And again, for me, we get these course evaluations every semester, right? But I saw a lot of information here on this survey that people would not put on a course evaluation. So that was valuable for me too. I don't feel like students are necessarily going to talk about experiences of feeling isolation on campus and in the classroom. And so it was good for me to be able to see that, because I was reminded that I don't have to wait for the university to make changes. I can make these big differences in my own classroom. I can make sure that people feel like they're being included, that they have a safe environment. And so I started making changes right away to my syllabus and to the way that I structure my lectures based on everything that I learned as part of this task force. But also, there was a lot of comments around just not having enough BIPOC students, staff, and faculty members on campus. And so every time I see some recommendation saying, you know, simply recruit more, I know that that is not the way to go. It's not just about recruiting. It's also about creating an inclusive environment so that we stay. If we come and then don't feel well supported, and then all of this is in vain. You're going to be doing this over and over again, and we're all wasting our time. But again, for me, the biggest takeaway was that needing to make changes to my own classroom to make it safe. And I have that authority, but also I can put pressure. The little power that I have on campus, I can also apply pressure as well. And it was a reminder for me to do that as well. Because, as I said before, I think, and I see this time and time again, you ask students for their input and then you don't do anything meaningful with the information. And I think that that's the worst thing that we can do in this situation, is ask students, how can we help you? How are you feeling? Like, how would you like to be supported? And then ignore it. And then turn around and do this survey again. You really want to make sure that you're seeing meaningful changes in people's experiences on campus. So I look forward to seeing what happens in the future. Thank you.
So, great. I wanted to say hello and good morning, friends, enemies, and those of you still under review. My name is Warren Scherer. Thank you very much for the polite laughter. I use laughter to diffuse when I am nervous. Thank you all very much. So, in responding, my position as the director of the Gender and Sexuality Campus Center, there are a couple of things that I want to share with you. So my entry point when engaging with the data vis-a-vis lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, plus student populations. So one, I want to think, first and foremost, think about my own spheres of influence and invite other folks to think about their spheres of influence. My primary entry point, though, is that that belonging is a fundamental need, and that LGBTQ plus populations are a steadily growing population in higher education. Right, so when I think about recruitment, so on and so forth, like we're bringing more folks in, are we changing the environment, right, or simply exposing more people to a harmful, hostile, intimidating environment? A couple of other things. I often think upstream, right? So like I recognize that relative to their non-LGBTQ plus peers, LGBTQ plus students do not feel as welcome, as safe, as respected, or have the same degree of belonging. So I want to think upstream, like why is that happening? And then I think about the various systemic influences. So one, cultural expectations. So we as an institution embrace the expectations, right? So tout or rely upon Madison, the city, also the campus being known as inclusive, as affirming, so on and so forth. But I also think about the other aspects of the terrain, so the built environment, the policy and procedural environment, and then interpersonal. So in what ways are students, faculty, and staff prepped to engage with and respond to LGBTQ plus students and their needs? The other thing that I want to highlight is that LGBTQ plus students witness hostile, harassing, and intimidating behavior at higher rates than their non-LGBTQ plus peers. They also experience the same at comparable, if not higher rates to their non-LGBT peers. And I want to invite folks to return to the conversation about spheres of influence, right? Like in what ways can we influence the built environment for LGBTQ plus students? In what ways can we change the cultural landscape? In what ways can we address policy and procedural hiccups or barriers to creating a welcoming, inclusive, affirming, and safe environment for LGBTQ plus students? And one of the things that acknowledging that I'm hesitant to say that when I first engaged with the data about LGBTQ plus students, I felt defeated. Right, so there are 4 people in my office, and I think about like, what can we do as an office of 4 do to transform an entire institution to benefit LGBTQ plus students, right? And then further, I think about BIPOC, so Black, Indigenous, people of color, LGBTQ plus students as well, as like even the impact to them is even more amplified, right? So in what ways can we tackle the cultural landscape, the built environment, as well as the policy and procedural terrain to improve the overall campus experience for LGBTQ plus students? So I look forward to continuing the conversation, particularly inviting folks to think upstream. What can we proactively do, right, when we find a singular barrier, not assuming that it is an isolated incident for one individual, right, but there are likely more folks who are more LGBTQ plus students who are adversely impacted, and we can make a nominal change that will benefit a much larger or broader population. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very glad to be a part of this experience. I am an alumni of the university, and I've worked for the university for years. And it was really interesting, my first opportunity to review the data up close to see the comments there. And what was really interesting is that I saw some reflections of what I experienced nearly 40 years ago. And it's pretty shocking, but what's different now is the invitation to give voice to those experiences. So change is possible. I've seen it, and I am inspired by the courage of the young people and the faculty that are risking their comfort and their ease to advocate on behalf of what is right and what is just and what should be a human experience. I will talk to you today about third spaces, and third spaces is a social cultural term that really speaks to a sense of community, right? Places that we gather. It's different than home and work and classrooms. It's places such as the library, dining spaces, our recreational spaces, right? The other things that really, I'll say, facilitate our sense of being and even belonging. And they have such a large landscape upon the experiences of students. They're the things that cultivate the UW experience beyond the classroom when we really think about it. And in some cases, If you think about it collectively, all the things that represent third spaces, that's a body that needs to be included in what we're talking about today, as opposed to approaching it separately. I'll explain why it's really important for third spaces. Why does it matter? A big theme in what students were communicating, I believe was mentioned before, is a sense of connection and belonging, that there's a representative percentage of students who don't feel connected to UW or to their peers. There were lots of requests for more events and activities to not only facilitate their similar group gatherings and connections, but also cross groups and an invitational space to allies, and not a one and done type of experience, something that they can look forward to, getting out and getting connected, because those things we know definitely inform the well-being of individuals and feeling a sense of connection. We're talking about mental health here. You know, so many students leave and they don't have a sense of identity or where they belong. And if they can remember those familial experiences, who knows what role that might play in supporting their academic goals and commitment by remaining a part of that community. So this is an invitation and an opportunity for considering innovative ways to embody the intentions and the values that we're talking about today in places that cultivate experiences that matter to students. There's the exhibit at the Chaser Museum. That's pretty powerful. I believe that's an important, I'll say first step is even identifying what has occurred. And as I saw, some things still occur, a number of things still occur and have yet to be uncovered. That's really important because students who may not really understand why this is all necessary now have a chance of seeing some of the documentation of things that people have experienced. So that's an important way in which our gallery spaces are stepping into the opportunity that we're talking about here. There are about 4 to 5 aspects or facets that I've noticed within the Commons that correlate to the report that Gabe talked about today and that is available. There's a great desire for places that are accessible and accommodating. And very often, when we think about accessibility, you think of what is required. And I'm encouraging consideration beyond what is required and of compliance, but what experience would you like others to have in our spaces? I mean, we're talking about, people who know me well kind of made Josh about that, but this is the heart space, right? This is a thing that puts a smile on your face and makes you want to come to work and come to class and want to come back and hang out. This is important stuff. I do believe it's critical to the social emotional well-being of students. Accessible places go beyond the physical things. There is a growing percentage of students and individuals who are identified as invisible, have invisible disabilities. And we're talking about those who are on the spectrum, autism spectrum, those with dyslexia, those with Tourette's syndrome. It goes on and on. There's so many. But how could our spaces be re-envisioned in ways to be more welcoming and inclusive when we talk about sensory experiences in spaces and places, even in our recreational spaces? What are we doing to offer that release, that sense of comfort, that sense of inclusion in our spaces, even within our classrooms, and even in what's available here? So this is, again, like I said, an invitation and an opportunity. When we talk about accessible and accommodating, again, this goes into maybe what signage we use, but not only that, how we design spaces, how we navigate the spaces that we have, even in terms of the layout of such spaces as we have today. In what ways does this support individuals who might have those challenges is something we really need to think about, even with regards to our signage. In academic environments, assume that it's here, just read it. But there's different ways of interpreting words and meanings. And if we seek to do no harm, but to invite, these are things that we really need to talk deeper about. A sense of connection, as we stated, having a sense of having group opportunities. And in third spaces, there's a lot that goes on in the unions, but what about other spaces? And so this is really an invitation not only to the groups, not only to the offices that are deemed responsible, but even within departments and department spaces. We do have some wonderful social and lounge type spaces, but how welcoming are they? When you think about it, what are the elements of a space that's welcoming that would facilitate a sense of connection and that are accessible? We're not talking about just furnishings, we're not talking about imagery or signing or naming, but think, what are the characteristics that are associated with experiencing a sense of welcoming and belonging, a sense of connection, that are safe, right? These are things that is an invitation for you to identify. How does this department lounge, or how does this library space? And I can tell you personally that the libraries are looking at how do they design or arrange places in a way that they facilitate welcoming to groups that have different interests and needs in this campus. And I would say that we recognize that the primary reasons that students are here, they're here as scholars, but they're here as individuals seeking to grow and form connections and will be alumni one day. Safety was a significant area. I think it's always important. One incident is one too many, but there's too many times where students experience and witness, and the burden falls on them to report things, but when they see things, we're talking about trauma in some instances. There is a fear of going into spaces and places. And people may not see themselves as fearful, but I do remember walking into a large study room and seeing an overwhelming look of faces. And you would have thought I was E.F. Hutton. People look up. And I'm like, what are they looking at? I just want to come into a space. That's overwhelming to students who just want to come and sit and study. They're not the exhibit, right? They're simply students wanting to be welcomed and invited. And we're talking about things that involve even training of staff. How do we facilitate that sense of welcoming, belonging, and safe experiences within our spaces and places? Just think about that. And also, communications is so important. Students talked about need for safety, but I think it's really important to not only ensure that these third spaces communicate in some way that they are also safe spaces, that they will be heard, that there is consequences. Because that was the thing they talked about. Accountability was another thing that the students said. How do we know that those are held accountable for what they do? And so if they're aware, there was a reference to Whitty, for example, an experience that happened in 2019. And although it certainly was traumatizing to the individual, what is it for those who are thinking they're the next potential victim? What could be done to ensure their safety and welcoming experiences in our places? There's lots of work that could be done, but this is, again, an opportunity and an invitation to consider how our third spaces can be so much more to cultivate the experiences that UW hopes to have upon them coming and leaving. So I can go on and on, but I won't. I'll have to pass the mic, but thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you to the wisdom of our panel. As Nola said, this is an opportunity and an invitation to think about what our spheres of, we have spheres of control, we have spheres of influence, and we have spheres of concern, and certainly our sphere of concern is the largest of those spheres. But I think through coalition building and partnerships across campus, we can help extend our reach beyond our grasp to be able to design interventions that speak to the concerns and the voices of the students that have given their time and their labor so freely to answer the survey. So we have about a minute left. So I apologize that there's not a whole lot of time for questions, but I don't know if there is 15 minutes? We have 15 minutes left. Look at time is a construct. So I'd like to then open it up for questions. If there are questions, there should be somebody coming around with a microphone as well. We don't have 15 minutes. Okay.
Is it on? Is the mic on? We don't have it. You were right about that.
Okay.
Okay, great. Yeah, one thing that stood out for me that has me intrigued is why did respondents of the Buddhist faith respond that they felt more uncomfortable around here? I thought that was kind of surprising. Thanks.
James, do you want to comment a little bit about how that popped up on our... Yep.
Is this on? Okay. It is something that we looked at. When we do some of these analyses, some of the things that we might see are not necessarily because of the characteristic that you see, but because of things correlated with the characteristic that you see. And I don't have a perfect answer for you, but students that identified as Buddhist were also disproportionately more likely to be from South Asian and Southeast Asian descent. And that may be catching a particular ethnic or cultural group that isn't identified in some of the other disaggregations that we do.
So I apologize, we are out of time. But time just flies. Like I said, it's made up. Time is made up. I'd like to thank you for your time this afternoon. Please help me thank our panelists once again. We hope that you will continue to engage us and the data, and we look forward to collaborating to create interventions on behalf of our students. So thank you.